connecting with Dr. Barkin here and having these conversations with our kids about tragedy and what is appropriate and what is not based on age. And the reason I'm asking is I have a 5-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 16-year-old. And the messaging to these groups are very, very different. So, Dr. Barkin, I want to talk about 3 groups, and I kind of see it as pre-K to early elementary, sort of up to 6 or 7 years old. Then looking at late elementary to early middle, where these kids are kind of figuring out how the world works and their friends are becoming much more important to them. And then high schoolers, where, frankly, they probably heard about it before I even had a chance to talk about it because they've seen it from, a text message or a TikTok or whatever it might be. So let's first start with pre-K to early elementary. How, as a parent, do you approach a difficult conversation about tragedy with a youngster like that?
The first thing that I like to do is listen to what the child is saying, regardless of age, because kids are extremely intuitive, and us adults believe that we know what they're thinking, but we have no clue what they're thinking. So the first thing is to listen to them and get a sense of where they're at. It's common for very young kids to have very morbid fascinations with death and to be fixated on gruesome details. So if you hear that from your kids, don't freak out. That's normal. And that's a way of trying to make sense of that. And that can happen even in young kids. I think that for all kids and really all adults, for all of us, we share this in common. We are reeling. Like the vibe here today as we're recording this is fear. Stores are closed. Schools are closed. Everybody feels unsafe. Yet the reality of the situation is if you went out right now on the beach or took a walk on a gorgeous day, the likelihood that you're going to be harmed is really low. So rule number one in processing this with your kids, with yourself, is to stay calm and to soothe them and to get them to realize that they're safe, that they really are likely safe. Yep, bad things can happen. But in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of a tragedy such as we've experienced, believe it or not, the more you get into it, the more you debrief a critical event, the more damage that you could do, the more scary it can become, the more fearful and panicky fantasies can arise. So rather than ask pointed, explicit questions to kids, the first thing is to provide a sense of safety, hugging, listening, and real soothing. And that is across the entire span. And also not to freak out as a parent if your kids ask you things that are gruesome or seem inappropriate to you.
So for young kids, though, I would imagine limited details as you create that sort of safety net that you're talking about.
As limited as possible, as few details as possible.
Yeah.
That everybody is okay. Some people have been hurt or killed. We don't know a lot now, but honey, we're safe. Yeah. We have each other. And the focus on being together and having each other. And as a parent, doing the thing that us parents should be doing best, which is to soothe and calm our kids. That's where our heads have to be. We don't have to be psychoanalysts. We don't have to be forensic experts trying to figure out what was on the mind of this shooter or this terrible killer. We just need to be present and psychologically available for our kids and tolerate the questions that they have, which are going to change over time. So
go ahead.
No, right now, people are just freaked out in the immediate aftermath. And what parents will find is that over time, in the hours, days, and weeks ahead, that everybody's kids will have different ideas and that they'll express those ideas. So as parents, we have to be willing to meet our kids where they are and discuss what's on their mind.
I think it's important too, when it does come to kids that are a little bit older, what I'm finding is that my 11-year-old, for example, is much more aware now. And I worry so much that what I'm going to share is, pardon me, I worry what I'm going to share is going to be too much? Or if I don't share enough, is that sort of breaking trust when he finds out, what it may actually be? So sort of threading the needle, if you will, on figuring out for those late elementary, early middle school kids when they're figuring out the way the world works, what's the balance for the right amount of information for them?
Every kid is different, and some middle and high school children are more mature than others. So you know your kids, and you have to read the nonverbal signals when you're speaking with your kids. So if they get fidgety, if they begin to look away, if they begin to look agitated as you're talking about these sorts of things, you really want to back away because you really don't want to increase the fear response just yet. In my community, the psychiatric community, we're very aware of patients that have anxiety disorders or other traumas that can be triggered because we know that traumatic events readily trigger people who have experienced prior traumas. So, and I realize this may be a very special case, although sadly not, is that a lot of our kids have experienced past traumas. So we also have to be mindful from what they take in the news or what they may experience in their personal lives, whether it be from poverty or abuse issues, that the events that our kids take in really will re-trigger them. And as parents, the most important thing is to provide a sense of cushioning so that the re-triggering, should it occur in kids who are more vulnerable, for example, or adults, we can be particularly protective.
I've also found that allowing space for the conversation to come up again, because sometimes I have the conversation. Obviously, we have this very recent situation where we had a conversation in the morning, kind of got nothing, and then went back to it, like just checking in, how you doing, and still didn't really get much from him. And then as everybody's going to sleep, suddenly he had a lot of questions. And there were sometimes even just simple questions like, did we lock the door? Do you think police have already gotten him? That kind of thing. So just because it doesn't feel like maybe whatever it is you're saying is sinking in right away, doesn't mean they're not processing it, and just allowing that space for them to come back to you.
That's right.
Even hours later.
Exactly. We have to allow that there's repetition and there's time, and that people will take time to come to a thought, to come to a specific cognition or belief. And we have to, as parents, be prepared to answer that. That's the most effective thing to do. Another thing that's extremely helpful is to empower older kids. And what I mean by that is, since your son, your 11-year-old, is asking you really good questions. Should we lock the door? The door is locked. These are things that we should all be doing. So coming up with a family safety plan, the act of empowering our kids and ourselves to make things safe at home, the doors are locked, the cars are locked, whatever the personal circumstances of the house are secure, allows us to do something. And the act of doing something reduces anxiety. We feel empowered rather than feel passive and rather than feel like potential victims. So I love involving family. When my kids were young and we were growing up in Maine, long before we had any of these concerns, we had these things called fire drills. And that was, where are people going to go if there's a fire? What's going to happen? What's the plan? Hope is not a plan. A plan is a plan. And when we have plans, we don't have to feel so anxious. A good plan includes how to get away from danger, how to stay in touch, but really where people need to go and get to. So all of the things that your 11-year-old is suggesting and asking are really, really helpful, and he should be commended.
Let's then talk also about teenagers, high school kids who, sometimes are receptive to conversations with parents and sometimes are not. But then also, just frankly, they know a lot. My daughter yesterday, timing wise, the day after the shooting, came down and already knew she didn't have school and the reason why before I even had the conversation. So by the time they're in high school, are we just having frank conversations with our kids about what it is that has happened, reassuring them that they are safe and, the likelihood of something happening in our home is very rare. But what does that conversation look like with, teenagers or young adults?
Yes, we're going to learn from our high schoolers because they're going to have access to the facts likely sooner than we will. So that's when the roles change a little bit, where rather than give information as we may to a middle school or a preschool age child, with a high schooler, they're more like a peer. You're having a discussion about what happened. So treating them like an adult, being appreciative of what you're learning, being open and honest, and most importantly, acknowledging their feelings. And as you say, making sure that they know that they're safe with you and with their friends is important. Another dynamic, and it's really kind of a critical dynamic with older kids in high school and certainly college, is as parents, we may overestimate the impact that we have. The older kids, high schoolers and college kids, tend to get their inputs from their friends, from their peer group. So often it's helpful to check in with your kids, not only about how they're doing, but about how their friends are doing. Again, showing your role that it's probably good to know who your kids' friends are in high school and college, so that by checking in with your own kid about how their friends are doing, indirectly you're checking in with your own kid as well.